You're listening to The Q Switch with your host, Spence.
Welcome, one and all, to the Q Switch Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Spence, and the mission of this show is to tackle subjects currently impacting ophthalmology, where we attract the innovators, thought leaders, and forward thinkers shaping the field of ophthalmology to discuss their unique perspectives. So let's get into it. Today's guest is Dr. Manoj Motwani, a board-certified ophthalmologist in San Diego and founder of Motwani LASIK Institute, recently rebranded as Cornea Revolution. Motwani is known for pushing beyond the traditional replace the cornea mindset and focusing on corneal repair and visual rehabilitation, especially for complex, irregular corneas. He's developed and patented what he calls the CREATE protocol, corneal repair, epithelium, and topography enhanced, a staged topography-guided approach designed to normalize irregular corneas and then refine the refractive outcome. He's also published in the peer-reviewed literature on topics spanning refractive outcomes and surgical planning, plus work describing the CREATE and CXL or cross-linking protocol for keratoconus care. Dr. Motwani, I have been looking so forward to having you on the show and this episode happening, so welcome and thanks for making time for us.
Thanks for having me here, David. It's very nice of you. Thank you.
Hey, so let's go ahead and jump right into it and ask you the first question of your practice has evolved from Motwani LASIK Institute to Cornea Revolution. What changed in your thinking or in the patient population that made cornea repair the center of the brand and mission?
The introduction of the technology here in the United States that made such a big difference. You know, there was initial work on my part to make better corneas post LASIK going back to 2001. I worked with NIDEC for a little bit, and we were making a cornea that reduced spherical aberration that basically was designed to make a smoother shape. At that time, there was topography-guided ablation was being invented in Switzerland and Germany by Theo Seiler, and it was available in the United States. And they started trying to get approval here in 2012. Sorry, it was available in Europe and the rest of the world from 2003 on. And they started to try to get approval here in 2012. And that really was a big a jump. It's really a revolution. And one of the problems was you had this technology, but how do you use it? Because people did not fully understand exactly how the eye focusing system worked. There were all these theories and estimates trying to figure out how the light really was focused by the eye and what aspects we needed to treat that would actually make for a better focusing system. The eye is really, when you come down to it, two components. It's a focusing system and a light gathering and transmission system. If a person was to liken it to a camera, you have the lens system, and then you have what used to be the film is now the digital sensor that sends the image to a processing unit. Okay. So the eye is a focusing system like the lens on a camera. It is the back of the eye like the sensor that collects the light. Okay. And that'll be how many megapixels and all that, how it is. Okay. And then it's going to send that information to the brain, which is like the CPU. The brain shows you the image in your head, and so you see it. A camera, you put it up on a screen. Well, it used to be film, but let's just stick with the digital world now. Okay. And so essentially, I cannot, and no one really knows how to fix the neurological part. You can't fix the damaged light collecting sensor. It's a direct part of the brain. People are working on that, but no one knows how to grow nerve tissue. Okay. Right. What we work on is the parts that affect the focusing system. The majority of the focusing of the eye is done by the cornea. So yeah, that's where the real things happen here. So the ability to do laser on it just makes a symmetrical round shape, kind of like putting a pair of glasses or a contact lens. But if you don't have a symmetrical cornea to begin with, if you don't have a proper normal curvature to begin with, having a big round laser shape is not going to affect the problem. It's just like a damaged lens, a window that's been warped. How do you fix that? Okay. You have to fix that by fixing the lens curvature, replacing the window pane. If you could regrind the window and get the warp out, it would transmit light correctly. These are the kinds of things the corneal specialty has really not known how to do. What we essentially do is if we have a damaged cornea, we say cornea transplant. We say scleral lens first. Problem is, hard lenses, scleral lenses, 30% of people can't tolerate. And if that doesn't work, then cornea transplant. Now, a cornea transplant comes from a donor cornea. You get about a 40% failure rate across 10 years. The other problem is it's not a matched cornea. It's not the same curvature. You're taking it from a person that had one type of cornea and one type of curvature, putting on an eye that has a different cornea, different curvature. Okay. But the worst part is you're suturing it in. And
Mhm.
every single suture to put it in would have to be the exact same length, the exact same depth, the exact same tension to actually pull that cornea without making an irregular cornea. Okay. It's impossible. It's just like when they did radial keratotomy and did the incisions in the cornea, you can't make 8 or 4 or 12 incisions in a cornea that are the exact same depth, the exact same length, and placed perfectly in opposition to each other by hand. It's not possible.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
So even the corneas end up quite irregular too. And so the cornea transplant people go to, it's the idea is, okay, here we go. That's all we got. It's not true. We can actually now, with segmental laser correction, this is segmental laser where we are not doing a big round laser, but imagine a laser that's whittling down the high spot. Okay. If you actually have some wood or even some putty, how do you go and make it smoother? You go over the high spot, right? And you make it so you sand where you actually bring the high spot down to the level of everything else. If you use a big sander, it's still going to leave it. So what we're doing with this is we're reconstructing the cornea by segmentally lasering high spots and raising low spots. And we do this by taking a topographic image of the cornea to show its high and low spots. And then we then create a pattern of how to actually fix that and make that more regular. That's the simplest version of it. When you do that, you start then coming into the problems of how do you handle the astigmatism part? Does fixing the high and low spots actually interact with the out of round, which is astigmatism? How, when you fix that, will you actually understand or be able to properly calculate if they're going to be farsighted or nearsighted? Then you start working at these other issues. Part of what here is when I got involved with this, the technology was very exciting. Wait, we can fix all these corneal issues, but there were a lot of practical problems. So even when it was approved in the United States, even the company still didn't fully understand how to use it.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so there were people already using topography guided ablation in Europe before it got here to reduce the flaws. We wanted to do was say, okay, not just reduce the irregularity. How about we make as normal and uniform as a cornea as we can to restore as much vision as possible? And while we're at it, get rid of all of the refractive error so they get as close to having perfectly normal corneas or perfectly normal vision as we can. How does the irregularity to bring someone like keratoconus who's damaged for life back into a situation where it can restore vision to a place where he doesn't or she doesn't feel that limitation of her eyes all the time, where they can function as normal? That's really what the passion was. And it was the technology getting approved that brought us there.
So, so take us back when you were early in your LASIK career. What kinds of cases humbled you the most? The ones that made you realize standard refractive playbooks weren't enough.
We had patients that would come in and we just didn't fully understand why they didn't see properly. And this goes on today too. It still does. There are plenty of LASIK patients out there that don't see properly or have LASIK and they say, oh, it went bad after a couple of years. They have a procedure, they have halos, they have glare, and you just can't figure out how to fix this. You don't have the tools and you don't have the understanding. And that's still pervasive in the field today. This
Hmm.
is even just the regular LASIK procedure. You have cataract patients today, for example. The cataract surgeons are not fully aware. They're aware, but they don't understand how the consequences on a topography, how to read it, how to understand it, and the possibility of fixing it when the cataract incisions actually cause an irregular cornea, which is actually possible. Those are those patients that just keep coming and saying, they may see 20/25 or something on a chart and have no real refractive error, but they say they just don't see well. It just goes on today. Those are those LASIK patients that go, oh man, I just don't see right. Couldn't figure it out. You literally couldn't figure out what was going on. And a lot of people today, unless they start understanding this, a lot of doctors don't understand it. But that was the journey. The journey
Mhm.
was, how can I figure this out? What is going on with these people? We had to work our way up to bigger problems. First, there was, is what's causing these problems? How do we just make this a better cornea if you're just doing a regular LASIK, so we don't have the problems associated with even just regular LASIK? How do we do that?
Mhm. Mhm. So, and I think it leads almost somewhat into my next question. So because you have focused heavily on irregular corneas and RK, prior PRK, LASIK issues, ectasia, keratoconus, trauma infection type distortions. What patterns did you keep seeing that convinced you repair could beat replace in the right patients?
The interesting thing is when you do this, if you can prevent a patient from needing a corneal transplant, and you can do this, it becomes a permanent solution. They no longer have to worry about their cornea transplant rejecting, going bad, the irregularity of the cornea transplant, the vision issues. This is now their cornea for life. We don't need to bring in any more surgeries. We don't need to bring in new donor tissue. This is it. This is their cornea now going forward. And so, idea of doing that, saying, okay, can we actually eliminate 80 to 90% of cornea transplants that are being done, has now come to light. It really is a reality. We can today, 80 to 90% of cornea transplants are done. Okay. Yeah. No,
That is a crazy number. 80 to 90% gone.
yeah, severe keratoconus, up to the point where you'd be surprised how we can bring vision back. People who are 20/80, 2200, 2150, 2400, and we can bring vision back. And so we can fix RK, radiokeratotomy of all these irregular corneas, and we can make a really uniform cornea again. A lot of the scars and irregularity from trauma, from surgery, LASIK, PRK, pterygium surgery, cataract surgery, infections. Doctors say it's a full thickness scar. No, it's not. It's almost
Hmm.
never a full thickness scar. It will stay.
Really?
Yeah. And it's almost never. If you look at cross sections of the cornea using some of the devices like OCT and even the Pentacam a bit, you can actually get into the cross section and actually see how far down the scar goes. And it's virtually never a full thickness cornea. Why? Because if it was a full thickness scar, right, the cornea would have ruptured. That means the infection would have eaten its way through the entire cornea and the cornea would have ruptured. It's a pretty sensible thing. So how do you call something a full thickness scar without a cornea rupturing? That would mean the infection went all the way and the scarring went. So a lot of these corneas that end up having transplants don't need them.
Hmm.
Remove the scar tissue, make a more uniform cornea, make a stable cornea, and the patient keeps their own cornea.
Huh. Seems all too simple, really. And we're going to get into that in just a second,
Yeah.
in just a moment.
The idea
But
is simple. The execution is a little more complex.
I'm sure. So, just for the listeners who are cornea trained, where do you draw the line clinically and ethically between this is a repair candidate versus this needs endothelial keratoplasty or transplant?
It depends on how far it is and how much tissue is left. Okay. And so cornea people and ophthalmologists are just looking at one thickness. They look at the thinnest area and say, this is the thickness of the cornea. That's not what we look at. What we look at is where the tissue needs to come out of the cornea. So we have to look at the entire pachymetry map of the cornea between pentacam and
Hmm.
OCT, and then match that with actually the tissue removal areas when we're doing a segmental correction. Turns out a lot of these corneas are not too thin because you're not taking out the most tissue from the thinnest area. You're taking it out from other areas. And so what happens is you have to then decide, do I have enough tissue to have a stable cornea afterwards? Do I have enough tissue to do corneal cross-linking afterwards? And it kind of decides itself too, because when a cornea becomes so distorted and so, so severe, we can't even get good maps of it. So we can't even do
Ah,
it there. Okay.
interesting.
So let's say a cornea really gets too thin. I mean, these people have poor vision, the maps are lousy, and even if you can bring up a repair, the repair tissue amount is more than is actually present in the cornea. And so it sometimes decides itself. But interesting, the pattern stays so continuous. We even see significant keratoconus patients come in here. They all have tissue within the same range. It's so rare for me to see a patient come in here with tissue more than that or less than that. When they come in less than that, they're just going into high drops. They're going into severe, and their cone just looks like it's, the worst pictures like you find on Google. But it's very interesting. We will see even fairly significant cones and severe corneas, and they very often come in with the exact same range. And I could tell you, it always
Interesting.
falls within a certain amount where the tissue is 370, 380 in the thinnest point, goes up to about 440 in the center, and then it's thicker on the outside. And it's always kind of the same range.
And all these people are treatable.
Yes. Yeah. That's keratoconus. Radial keratotomy and a lot of these others, we don't worry about the tissue as much. It's can we capture the level of distortion with the devices to be able to map it and then treat it.
So I really want to drill down to the repair versus replace philosophy. When you compare corneal repair to DMEC, DSEC, PKP pathways, what do you think is the most misunderstood by surgeons and patients about visual quality, stability, and long-term trade-offs?
One of the biggest problems that are misunderstood is the understanding of corneal irregularity, and it's expressed in higher order aberrations. And one of the problems is the system teaches us higher order aberrations in its theoretical form, but does not really put it into a form or a way for us to understand how to fix them. And so I was reading and hearing about higher order aberrations, which are the mathematical descriptions of corneal irregularity. So they would talk about tetrafoil and quadrifoil and coma and all this. And it all sounded great, but the whole picture doesn't come together. So they don't understand fully what the heck it actually means when you look at a topography. It don't understand how you actually can fix it. And so they don't fully understand corneal irregularity because the system's done kind of a poor job of explaining it because people had a pretty tough time figuring out how to fix it. And so what happens then is that there is the lack of understanding of how irregular a replacement actually is. We understand the replacement may not last. It may not last a lifetime. They need multiple replacements. We understand rejection. We understand 40% of transplants fail within 10 years. We understand all of that, but we don't understand that it's not about just, hey, they went from 2060 to 2030 on the chart, but now they see 2030 lines and starbursts out to here. So we're focused on where they can get on a chart. We're now focused on the quality of the actual refractive transmission of light. How homogeneous is that light falling on the retina? And the problem is a replacement is going to have a very difficult time ever being completely uniform, maps the curvature, and the surgery be done in a way where we simply come out with a fairly uniform cornea. Therefore, it will always be irregular. So not only will you have the risk of losing it, you will have the risk of visual issues. And if doctors don't understand those visual issues properly, which is a big problem today, they can't diagnose them. They can't read a topography to fully understand what's going on. And that's a failing of our system. That's a failing of the corporations right now that are aware of this and not willing to actually move forward and discuss it, because it leaves people who are not important enough to be worth the legal liability. They're not a big enough consumer market. What's happened is that if these people with all these problems really are not a big enough group for the company to say, okay, this is worth teaching surgeons this complex stuff for. And this is worth the legal liability of trying to teach complex stuff to surgeons. Well, who else is going to teach them? If the company doesn't, this is the way our system is, right? The company doesn't get involved. The corporations, the device makers don't get involved. It doesn't move forward. It doesn't get into the review journals. It gets into the peer reviewed journals, but it doesn't get into the mainstream avenues that regular ophthalmologists and regular cornea surgeons get their information and learning from.
So, in your world, what does success mean? Best corrected visual acuity, high order aberrations, patient reported quality of vision, night driving, contrast, and which metric tends to tell the truth when the chart doesn't?
It really is higher order aberration reduction is probably the best measure overall. This is something HOA and HOA reduction in peer-reviewed journals really only started in the last decade or less.
Really? Wow, seems like it would be
So
much earlier adopted than just 10 years ago. Odd.
no, it's actually, if you look at, and we did a pretty major review this summer for a paper that I was writing. And we essentially looked at every single study that was ever done with a laser anywhere source,
Sure.
or
Yeah.
a couple that we couldn't really use. So I couldn't use the data to compare to other systems. We managed to end up finding that there were 12 papers and some were comparison papers. And we got, I think, 19 or 20 systems with data that showed if they actually raised or lowered HOA, that they made a better cornea. Okay. So if I was to do laser on you, David, right, let's say I was doing a -3 on you, just a regular myopic correction, or a -3 with some astigmatism, right? So you would assume that laser would not be making a worse cornea. It was just treating the prescription. It would not be introducing new flaws in the cornea. Description of the flaws in the cornea, right? If someone's nearsighted or farsighted, it's power. It's the cornea and the refracting system. Too powerful, not powerful enough. That's what we
Right.
do with laser, right?
Yeah.
We change the shape of the cornea to make it more or less powerful so the light gets focused properly. And astigmatism, for all its mystery, is it's just out of round. How do you make a central area of an oval cornea round? Okay. That's all it is.
Pretty
And
straightforward.
so HOA is the lumps and bumps, the irregularities, the flaws, the ripples. That's what that describes. That's the easiest way to describe it. If a cornea has no significant HOA, it's perfect. It's uniform. It's like the best mirror in the James Webb telescope, right? It's like as close to that $5,000, $10,000 lens on a camera you can get. You know what I'm saying? It's like a scleral lens for an eye, or an RGP, a perfect artificial surface. It's essentially bionic. Okay. The thing is, though, you'll never get perfection. You will never get 100% because it's biological, because the surface is still epithelium. It's still subjected to the stresses of the environment, right? So you'll never, ever be able to get 0 HOA. You're probably never even going to get it on the James Webb telescope, but you get pretty close, right?
Yeah.
That means those ripples and those flaws don't scatter light, right?
Mhm.
Even very, very dim. Remember the Hubble telescope, they got that messed up. They launched that Hubble telescope and it didn't work. The scientists analyzed the refractive error and the HOA, and they set up a cancellation device to cancel it out, and it worked.
Oh, what a great analogy.
Okay. So you can bring the Hubble back down to fix the mirror, to regrind it and segmentally remove the problems. So you set up a cancellation mirror. That's exactly what they did. And that's the entire idea. How do we sit there and take a cornea that's got all these flaws and then cancel them out? Okay.
Whether it's
And
high
so-
points, low points, just get it all evened out. So it's
got
nice and smooth and round.
That is so much easier for a doctor to understand than trefoil and coma and quatrefoil and all this stuff. You get what I'm saying? And so when you started showing them that, and that was where the light really clicked. So I actually started learning about these systems because I was curious from great doctors like Dr. Kanalopoulos, from Sissimus Limonis of Wavelight, who's their super brain, for some years before it ever became available. So I was learning because I was curious. And when it became available, I still couldn't understand and put this whole picture together. And when I actually started seeing what we were doing, I go, oh, okay, I get it. You're just sitting there lowering and raising the high spots and the low spots. You're just trying to make a nice curvature. You're basically trying to make a super normal or superhuman or an eye with less flaws. If you take a normal eye, David, And I sit there, not just take out the -3 and the -1 of astigmatism, but I also then map your cornea and find all the little flaws, and I take those out too. I've now created a super normal, better than human, normal focusing system.
Hmm.
Okay. The only way you can make the eye see better is to increase the nerve density in the back part of the eye, the retina, to increase the megapixel. Okay. So essentially, this is biohacking vision. So when we do this same repair procedure on a normal eye, we've actually biohacked it. We've actually made it better than normal human eye. And so the final repair protocol was first used on me
Is that right?
because I
Wow,
the map,
you were your very first patient.
not my first, but my final create protocol. And so I had aberrations and some decentration from my original laser because I was a -10 and a -9 in myopia. So I was pretty up there. And so at the beginning of COVID, I was convinced by my research that we could take another step on how to remove aberrations at a higher rate than what we were already doing. And that would actually then result in a better cornea. And I did it to myself. I had a friend of mine come in and guided him, did one eye, then the other eye. And my vision came out so good. It's like, I liken it to a really good TV, a 4K TV with a 4K Netflix stream. Like when I look across a Vista, and you know how you look on that great, that 4K stream, it looks so sharp and so clear. That's how I see things. So to finish the answer to that question, people look at your vision, but you can't tell on a chart if someone sees 3 of the 20/30 line. And you can't tell starburst, you can't tell all of that. People look at lines of vision improvement, right? Well, if the system works better, you're going to see better. So it's an indirect measure of whether you made a better cornea. People can look at how many people got 2015 or 2020, but it doesn't tell you the quality of the vision. So what has to happen is probably the best measure if a system is working to make a better cornea, to repair a cornea, whether it's on a person who never had a problem and make a supernormal cornea, or whether someone has an irregular cornea and then we make it better. One of the things that you look at is, did you reduce the HOA? Of course, you want to see the gained vision. Of course, you want to see that a higher percentage were able to get 20/20 or 20/30 or 20/40 or 20/25, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
You want that. You want to see people tell you, wow, I could drive at night again. You want to hear that, right? But that also corresponds to how much better you made that cornea. So it's the percentage of HOA reduction. And when we looked at those 19 systems, every single one of those systems, topography guided, wavefront, aspheric, WFO, ICE, ZX, Bausch and Lomb, well, Bausch and Lomb we didn't have data for. Sorry, even Smile, Alcon. Every single one of those systems increased HOA. Even the latest Alcon Innovize system, what they call WaveLight Plus, increases HOA in the studies.
Is that
Every
right?
single one.
Huh.
So, well, I was a little surprised by that myself, even working with this for years. There's never been a system that consistently lowers HOA.
Odd, because
Okay.
you
And
think
this was
with all
done on
the
primary eyes.
you
Yeah.
would think with the newer technologies that they would focus on reducing, but you're saying even the newest platforms
Yes.
of
Well,
these are.
it's like that regular LASIK that's been done every time on most of these lasers will increase HOA because no one fully understands how to make a more uniform cornea. That was the breakthrough. It was the understanding of how we can change the corneal shape because it turns out that when the reduction of HOA and the treatment of lower astigmatism, in other words, there is a link between how you remove the HOA and how you remove the corneal astigmatism that makes a discrete pattern that gets rid of the elevations of the cornea to make a more uniform cornea. And a uniform cornea will transmit light more homogeneously, taking away the aberrations, the halos, the glare, the doubling, the tripling, the stuff we don't like.
Mhm,
Okay.
mhm.
And so then even with a pair of glasses, you'd get great vision, even if the power was off. But then you can adjust the power. That's not hard. Okay. And so the idea is how much can you reduce HOA? And so what we went after was the reduction of HOA. That's really what we started delving into over time. First it was how do we make a more uniform cornea? And we could look at it like, wow, that's a really good topography. Cornea, it looks like I took a picture of a lens out of a machine, you know? And that's pretty cool. And you can see the visions and say, oh, I'm getting 80% 2015 and all this sort of stuff. But the real way to know if you made a better cornea is to look at the HOA before and look at the HOA after. And you got to use the same device because the different devices will measure a little differently. Action number is same device that took it before, same device that took it after. That makes sense?
Yeah.
And so when you do that, you start looking at the percentage reduction of HOA. And so, for example, when we were trying to fix keratoconus, and I was using the original Athens protocol with some modifications to get a little more uniform cornea, we were taking out 32% of HOA. Okay. Doesn't sound great, but boy, it really made a huge difference for those people. Now, when we discovered that the epithelium, the surface skin layer, was compensated, what it does is it thickens over the low spots and thins over the high spots. And we have knowledge of it that theoretically existed, but we couldn't really understand it because the first commercial epithelial mapping devices only became available in 2017.
Really?
From a company.
Yeah, I'm familiar. 2017.
Visionics. Yeah. And so we work with OptiView. And so what I started figuring out was how to actually look at the maps and see how the epithelial compensation was throwing off correction. And then we figured out how to treat it. And so when we did that, 32% on keratoconus went to over 50%. Now that was the key. Now, all of a sudden, we're sitting there getting 95, 97% of our eyes, even severe keratoconus, to better than 20/40, 20/40 or better.
Whoa.
And then all of a sudden, the patients are sitting there going, hey, I can drive at night again. Wow, this is like I feel normal. Like I'm not even thinking about my eyes as they're healing from this. And then if they still had a little refractive error over left, they can wear glasses, they can wear a contact lens. Or what we do is at a year out, we can do small corrections, taking out a small amount of the cross-linked tissue on top, do a small myopic or something correction, okay? Bring them even closer to zero. So it's almost like they never had keratoconus to begin with, okay? We went from RK that was radiokeratotomy, we went from 52% to 68% reduction of HOA, okay? And that was total HOA. That was not root mean squared RMS, which takes out the sort of the outliers and raises the number more.
Mm-hmm.
When we did this on primary patients, we looked at it and it turned out it takes out 31% on primary patients who don't have a lot in the first place. But if you use the internationally recognized root mean squared HOA total, which is take out the outliers, we went to 48%.
Well, it's a big jump.
And so when we're seeing these 19 systems in primary eyes increasing HOA by the lowest we saw was 3%, but that was on a system. Other studies were showing 15 and 25%. So that study is a little bit of an anomaly. Everything else was raising HOA 40%, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, 134, 200%.
Wow. That's crazy numbers.
And we were decreasing. We were the only one, and I was shocked. I figured there had to be something out there. We were the only study that decreased the HOA, total RMS HOA. We decreased it by half, 48%. Out of that was with 180 eyes.
Okay? So it's a good sample size.
And so what we're seeing is it's the consistent reduction of HOA then leads to the higher percentage of better vision, okay, and better quality of vision, okay. And how do we measure quality of vision? We don't have great tools. We have subjective tools and objective tools. Objective is HOA. Subjective is we give patients surveys. Do you have double vision? Do you have halos? Do you have starburst? Do you have any of this kind of stuff? We give people halos. We did the subjective too using the RSVP standardized study from Johns Hopkins. And we did that with patients. And we did that early on. I think it was in 18 or something like that, 2018. So at that point, that was a grant from Alcon. And I sent it to the biostatistician. And she sends me these graphs back from the data. And she says, I said, what is this? This has nothing on it. Well, that's a box plot. I said, well, all I see is an X line and a couple little spots over here, a couple dots. There's no boxes. And she said, that's because there were no complaints.
Wow.
I said, what? No. And I said, what are the dots? She said, those dots are the outliers that had minor complaints. Almost everyone had virtually no complaints at all. We don't have a box plot. The box plot is flat because the box plot is the gathering of the different clusters of complaints.
Right.
The subjective was, I was looking at this going, I'm sorry, what? I'm on the phone with this lady and I'm just going, I'm sorry, what? And I'm looking at this on my computer and I'm going, what?
Hey,
But
so
that's what came out.
so you mentioned a moment ago it's about the technology and the tools. So I'd like to
Yes.
maybe pivot to the technology stack and how you use it differently. So let's talk tech. What diagnostics are non-negotiable for you? Topography, tomography, epithelial mapping, if available, or aberrometry, biomechanics, tear film workups, and what do you think most clinics underutilize?
So the number one thing is what we do is we now use a 3-layered system of imaging. The number one complaint that has been traditionally present in the refractive community is that vector astigmatism estimates have shown that a significant number of eyes had posterior ocular astigmatism. That if you try to make a cornea more uniform by using the corneal based astigmatism, you would miss all those people that had astigmatism like in the lens of the eye. Okay. And the tools that have been used since 1990 have been what's called vector astigmatism tools. The
Vector astigmatism tools.
Right. And these are mathematical algebraic tools to look at corneas and how it's refracting light. And can you account for, for example, is the curvature of the cornea uniform, the posterior curvature of the cornea, is there astigmatism inside? It's trying to estimate all these things. Okay. So it comes up with the anterior corneal topography, if we can measure the astigmatism. We have the whole eye astigmatism we can measure, but we can't really measure anything in between to see how much actual posterior ocular astigmatism exists. That's what it's called. It's called ocular residual astigmatism or posterior ocular astigmatism. In other words, what astigmatism is present except for the front of the eye? Because we can't measure the eye. We just can't measure. We don't have any tools. Everything is light-based. So what we had to do was, first we sort of looked at it, and what we discovered is that, and I published this study this summer, and we took 1,500 eyes that we had removed all the topography guided astigmatism on and made a more uniform cornea. And so we looked at this, and we looked at every single error to see if it was going to be ocular residual or astigmatism from the back. How do you know? Well, if the cornea says you have no astigmatism, but the patient has astigmatism, it's somewhere behind the cornea.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
If you then correct the astigmatism on the cornea, you then have a cornea that reads astigmatism, the patient doesn't have any. And we looked at all those factors. So the vector astigmatism studies show we should have 18% of eyes with posterior ocular astigmatism, up to 30% that were looking at just posterior corneal astigmatism. And what the real number was? 3%.
3%.
So the question then is that every single time we've tried to move forward on making more uniform corneas, the holdup has been saying that we're going to get 20% of them wrong because you're not getting the posterior ocular astigmatism.
Right out of the gate.
Because the estimates were incorrect. When you actually just do it directly, it comes out to be 2.9%. We had 44 eyes out of 1,500 we could actually show and prove had posterior ocular astigmatism. Okay. So what we then did was, from all of that data, we created an algorithm. And this is important because if you want to treat irregularity, okay, you could treat irregularity. If you want to also fix the astigmatism, because a lot of these people have a lot of astigmatism, right? You won't treat the irregularity and astigmatism together until you have the right algorithm and protocol, because the different astigmatism numbers added to the HOA numbers create a distinctly different laser pattern. Okay. And so if I use one astigmatism as opposed to another astigmatism, I create a completely different cornea. And I could actually create new irregular cornea. That's what a lot of people don't understand. And so what we do is we now have an algorithm that uses 3 different optical imaging sources. We use topography for the corneal HOA. We use wavefront data to figure out with an algorithm when posterior ocular astigmatism is present and modify the surgical planning to incorporate that. And it works. We've done it on a bunch of eyes already. And then we use OCT data to determine if there's epithelial compensation of aberration, because the topography unit can't read when the epithelium is compensated. It just sees the front surface of the cornea. And so you leave aberration behind. And here's the problem. If you leave aberration behind, or if you create new irregular astigmatism, the epithelium compensates to that and throws off your correction. And so you have to try to get as much of the irregularity as you can to make it as uniform as you can so the epithelium doesn't compensate and throw the whole shape off again. And that
Interesting.
was the jump. We looking at the data from 2016 to 2020. When I got into COVID, I had the time. I looked through all the data because I was looking at, hey, it works great on these people. Why doesn't it work great on these people when
Uh-huh.
we're repairing corneas?
Uh-huh.
And that was the key. The key was the epithelial compensation. We were missing all that aberration. How much was it? Sometimes 25, 30% it was hiding.
Wow. Wow.
Okay, that's not a small amount. That's why we had the big
Yeah.
HOA jump.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you do that, you then take this data and you combine it together into an algorithm. Can that be done? Yes, that's part of my patents. In other words, you can take this and combine it into an algorithm where I don't have to do it. You don't need Manoj intelligence. You can use AI, right?
Yeah.
And so the idea is that we create a device that can do this entire thing, spit it out to the doctor. Here, go ahead and do this.
Really? So it is a certain device that you have, or is it?
I'm putting in the patents now.
Okay. Right.
Essentially, what I'm doing is I'm using 3 separate devices, then manually using my algorithm to put the data together. Okay. And so what happens is what we didn't know as a field is what data to use where.
Mm-hmm.
What data to use from wavefront, what to use from topography, what to use from OCT. We didn't know. That's the key. So what happens is if you're in this situation, it uses this, this, and this data. If you're in this situation, it uses this, this, and this data. And that's what the algorithm does. Right now I do it manually, but we can automate the whole thing.
I see, especially with AI and all that.
Yeah.
So you've written on surgical planning and refractive outcomes in peer-reviewed journals. When you're planning a complex case, what's the mental model for transplanting maps into a treatment plan that actually is predictable?
What you're asking is exactly what I was saying before. What data do you use in a situation? Okay. Do I use this data from this device to fix this problem? Do I use this data and this data? What do I use? And that's how you create the mental model. That's that part that I'm thinking that, okay, what do I have here? Do I have significant, epithelial compensation? Okay, then we don't need that data. If I do, the system has to be modified for this.
To account for that,
Does
right?
this have posterior ocular astigmatism? Okay, well, let's look at the algorithm. We look at the data. If they do, we then have to modify the planning with this. We base the whole thing on the corneal higher order aberrations. That is the main focusing. That is the anterior part, which is the most important part of a focusing system. It also is not changing, like lens changes occur. If you use a whole eye map, you're going to have lens changes. You're going to have vitreous changes. You're going to have corruption of data. It's not a long-term stable way. The best way is to make a most uniform anterior cornea because that doesn't really change. It stays the same. It's what you have for a lifetime.
And
Okay?
so almost
So
leads me to my next question, which actually I think you may have kind of really answered already, but I'll ask it anyways, just in case. You can obviously add to it. In an era where many surgeons lean on standardized nomograms, you're doing something more customized. Where does art end and reproducibility systems begin? And what do you do to turn your approach into a protocol?
the approach is already in a protocol. It's actually standardized. If you want to come down, David, and you sign an NDA, I can teach it all to you. I can teach you to do what I do. I can have a surgeon in here and do what I do. It's all standardized now.
Oh, okay,
I
right.
can just tell you what to do. The idea
Interesting.
is it took the research of all these years to standardize it. And the problem was that how do I actually use the devices, the technology to slowly walk down the path to see how this change will affect this change will affect this without hurting somebody. Okay. That's a little bit of the art. And that leads to scientific data, which leads to the final protocols, which has led to the LARA protocol, the layer yolk reduction of astigmatism protocol, which showed actually how the interaction occurs between HOA and corneal astigmatism to make a more uniform cornea. To the CREATE protocol, which is where we added in epithelial compensation. Okay. And so the protocols are now pretty much standardized. The idea is that the patents I'm writing now is how can we then take that and put it all into a device that does it all so the doctor doesn't have to do very much. It becomes standardized. Okay. And then as part of the issue, the laser companies think the doctors don't want to do the extra stuff. They just want to follow standardized nomograms for everything. And I have a little more faith in doctors. But that's one of the reasons the laser company doesn't work with this kind of stuff or pursue this. So a lot of my work has been standardizing it. Can I teach it to someone and get the same results? Can I put it into a device so when Dave Spence has his laser done, he gets the same results as if I sat there and I planned it?
So there's
And
uniformity between doctors and systems, so that what happens with a patient
yes,
in Richmond, Virginia, has
yep,
the same, again, given the same patient profile and all that. That same patient, if
yes,
they would have gone to a doctor in Seattle, would have the same outcome, following the same
yeah,
protocol and using the same stuff.
we've achieved this. Okay. And those are the patents I'm finishing up. We filed the major big patents last year. We got a couple more minor ones to go that are just offshoots of it, but we have it now. That's the device patents now, not procedure anymore, but device patents on how to make the device that does everything I just told you.
Mm-hmm.
So I the surgeon can be trained in a standardized manner. Here's how you take care of keratoconus. Here's how you take care of RK. Here's how you take care of corneal irregularity. And the art comes in the really weird, complex cases, like the scar. How deep do I go to take out the scar tissue on someone that had a corneal ulcer versus the irregularity? And
Mm-hmm.
that's some of the art. But essentially, that's the only way around that, is to essentially say, okay, some people will take care of the ones that are really more those really art ones. But
Mm-hmm.
really what we want is the majority of these repair cases that wouldn't end up in a transplant instead end up being mapped, scanned, and treated by a doctor with a machine that spits it out.
So I really want to take some time to really drill down and take a deeper dive into the actual create protocol. Define it for us, like mainline it, make it super simple. What is the create protocol mechanistically, and why does the combination of epithelium management, topography guided normalization matter so much in irregular corneas?
So what essentially happens is the create protocol is we're repairing a cornea and we're doing it by topography, but including how much of the irregularity is masked by the actual corneal epithelium. Okay. And so a normal corneal epithelium is 50 microns or thereabouts thick. It can fit in, for example, low spots to 80, 30 over 50, that's 60%. And so it can thicken a lot. It can thin from 50 over a high spot down to the 20s and 30s. Okay. And so you're talking about masking a huge variation of that. And so the first thing is, how do we repair a cornea and make it more uniform? That was the original LARA protocol. Okay. That was the description of HOA and low order astigmatism to make a more uniform cornea that
Mm-hmm.
refracts light. But
Okay.
the problem is, the bigger the irregularities, the higher the chance there is epithelial compensation. For normal small irregularities or flaws in a primary LASIK, right? Like, let's say I did it on you, assuming you didn't have anything else, then there's usually no epithelial compensation. It's still pretty uniform. But in repair situations, you have to take into account the epithelial compensation. And you can do it two ways. You can either take the map of the epithelial compensation and you can combine it with the map for the repair from the topography and say, okay, no, you got to go this much deeper here or less here, because it's the epithelium filling that, or the epithelium not showing you the full extent of that. Or what we do is we take advantage of the fact, because we don't have that technology right now. Okay. It exists in my head, but we don't have the ability because we don't have the device manufacturer to put that together. Okay. And so we could probably do it if we wanted to. But what we ended up doing was taking advantage of something the old timers like me learned 25 years ago. We know that if you actually laser epithelium and stroma come out at the same rate. Stroma is what's underneath. That's what we want to laser, right? And so it comes out underneath. Epithelium grows back forever. Stroma, what you're born with is what you get. So you want to reshape the stroma. So what happens is when you have those ripples, if you sit there and say, okay, it's supposed to be 50, but it goes down to 70. If you take a broad laser, like what's called a PTK, where you just doing a broad flat laser, and you start lasering down uniformly 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. At 50, it's all epithelium. Remember, now it's compensated, right? Let's say there's a low spot here and it goes to 70. The thing is, it's a broad flat laser. As you go down to 70, in the area is of the epithelium, you still take out an epithelium. Here, for the other higher spot, it's taking out the stroma. So you're using the epithelium itself as a mask to
Interesting.
take out the irregularity that's masking. So us Alzheimer's learned this stuff back in the day. This was we used to sit there and use masking agents to take out irregularities in the cornea. In other words, we would put something on a high spot, put a little corneal, like a little viscous solution, and laser down to try to get out the high spot. We were using crude methodologies. So I just took that idea and said, well, we can do it a lot more accurately this way, and it worked. And so the problem is, when you flatten that cornea, you're going to change the refractive error. It's already hard enough to know if you have to fix the refractive error. Not so much in keratoconus. Keratoconus is interesting. Most of those keratoconus patients come out pretty close to no correction. It's actually a little shocking. I just saw one today I did a year ago. Her left eye is now 20/20. Her right eye gets to 20/30 or so. She's about a -2.25 with adaptive astigmatism. And I'm going to do a small correction. I'm going to take out part of that in a couple of weeks. This has been a year. Okay. And so I do it at a small zone. I just check out 20 microns. We're good with that. But essentially it's corneal repair, epithelium, and we have to have that epithelial data, and it's customized from patient to patient. A transepithelial procedure, which is out there, assumes the epithelium is 50 microns thick. A customized transepithelial will say, no, we're going to look for where in the center, 5 millimeters, 6 millimeters, where the epithelium is the thickest, and use it as a mask to drill down through to flatten those irregular spots in the stroma. So that's epithelium and topography enhanced. So we have the topography part already, right? And now we have the epithelial parts that came out create. I didn't come up with it. I'm not smart enough to come up with bloody things. One of my partners, a patent advisor, he's much more creative. He came up with it. Like Lyra protocol, I didn't come up with either. The funny story is we were sitting around and we were figuring out how to make a more uniform cornea. And I was sitting there with Sissimus Lamotis, the brilliant fellow from Wavelight. And he says, we should call this Lyra protocol. And Lyra is my wife's name. And I go, and she was around. She goes, what? No. As soon as she said no, I got interested. I said, what do you mean? He goes, oh, you look reduction of astigmatism. You figure out the L and the Y. And that was easy because there were two layers that were yoked. It was the HOA layer and the low order astigmatism layer, the low order aberration layer. So we call them layer yoke production of astigmatism. So most people don't know Lyra protocols named after my wife. I came up with none of this. And so when I was sitting there, I did this repair protocol. It came create protocol because I couldn't come up with anything. He came up with it. Okay. That's what it stands for.
The staged concept is fascinating. There's the corneal normalization rehabilitation phase, then refinement later. How do you counsel patients through the in-between period, vision fluctuations, timing, and expectations?
That is, that's difficult sometimes. These are people in repairs. When you're doing this type of thing on a primary eye, it's not a big deal. You're in good shape. Okay. When you're doing this on a damaged eye, these patients have been told nothing can be done by 6 doctors for 20 years. Okay. They all come in and every doctor tells them can't help you. No one. The shame is people don't know about this, so they don't tell to even find it. The patient then come to you desperate, and they've been waiting years for help. And then when you do this, of course, no matter how much you warn them, they think it's going to be just like this. In a week, they'll be able to see better. And sometimes they don't. And let me tell you, that first week or two in some patients is 6, 7, 8 phone calls, emails, messages, panic, all of this. And you got to just calm them down and wait. I looked at him and said, I told you to work out. We were laughing about it. But he told me crazy. He's the nicest guy in the world when he comes in, emails this long with him. But yeah, it's difficult because they want it now. I tell patients, you live this once. I've seen this so many times. I know how this goes. It can be fast. It can be slow. The healing is what it is. You live it once. And yeah, they're sometimes scared, but usually in most patients, within about a week, keratoconus, RK, they start seeing well enough that we can actually start measuring their refractive error and put them in the glasses.
Is that right?
Usually have most patients within a week to 2 weeks being back, functional, driving, going to work. I've had keratoconus patients, to my shock, start driving in a week.
That's insane because that's not a common thing. If you have keratoconus, that's pretty much like You may as well
You're
be legally
telling me.
blind. It doesn't happen.
You're telling me. When this first started happening, I was absolutely flabbergasted. Believe it. This is when we were started doing the Create protocol. The results were so good. And we were looking at these corneas, like the cone was just so reduced that some of them looked like it was almost gone. And then these patients were downtrodden. And a few weeks later, they'd be like, I'm back in a week. I mean, I'm a little less surprised today, but it's still a wondrous thing to me.
Sure. So you described Create plus CXL or cross-linking for keratoconus. How do you decide who needs cross-linking, when to combine or sequence it, and when outcomes have surprised you most?
Cross-linking is just a way to strengthen a cornea. Okay. Cross-linking is just essentially you have a weakness in the cornea, whether it's surgical induced or it was genetic, which is keratoconus, and it's weak. So if you got a building, you got a ceiling falling down, it's weak. What do? You call somebody in and put a couple beams in there.
Yeah, you prop it up, fortify it.
Yeah. Cross-linking is propping up the cornea. It's a procedure where you saturate with riboflavin, shine ultraviolet light on it. And what it does is it catalyzes reaction between the corneal cells to build more bonds, bridges between them. That's all it is. It's the easiest thing to do. People have made such a big deal out of it on the forums and stuff. I read it and all these problems. And I go, it's the easiest thing we do. It's just not the aftercare is not being done right is the problem. Okay. Thinking is just strengthen it. So you only use it when you need to strengthen a cornea. Doesn't help RK because it's not a genetic problem. It's a physical incision problem. You can't cross-link incisions. Okay. But you need it for ectasia, keratoconus, LASIK-induced ectasia, pellucid marginal degeneration. Cross-linking is, to me, not very useful for anything else. Okay? It's only used there. So Create protocol fixes the cornea. In a case of a weak cornea, we just cross-link. So we call it Create plus CXL. I couldn't come up with a better name, so I just said that.
So let's go and turn, as we kind of shut things down here, on the adoption, the operations, economics, and teaching of others. Let's get real about adoption. What have been the biggest barriers, skepticism, training, technology, access, referral dynamics, patient selection, and how have you handled criticism or misunderstanding as this approach grew into what it is today?
When I first started doing it, I was praised by my colleagues and there was interest. And then there was this period where they couldn't figure out what the error rate was. And they said, it can't be as good. When you saw that there was some error rate, they thought it was always posterior ocular astigmatism. It wasn't. Other reasons, but no one had done the research to look at it. And so the laser company ended up sort of turning away from my work, a sort of a quick fix solution. And so I went off and just kept working on my own. And that was actually incredibly discouraging. It really was. And one of the things that happened at that time was I just sort of sat back, started focusing more on the repair stuff, on the data. And then COVID happened, which gave me a whole ton of time. Staff was bored, so they came in and helped me. And then I did it on myself, so I knew what I had. And so all that data, then I just kept writing papers. And I said, no, I thought I was wrong. I must have been wrong somehow. But the problem is the more I looked at the data, the more I was right. So my response has been sort of zip it, file my patents, because there was some stealing of my work already, and write papers. So I just kept writing them. I'm at 20 something now, okay? Peer-reviewed papers. So what I wanted to do was document all this, pairs, the whole shebang. I finished it last year, putting it into the patents, have all the data, writing the final papers, and now would I be willing to teach it? Probably. The best path forward for widespread adoption will be the recognition of a company who would then be able to go out there and teach it. Because the skepticism is, well, all these doctors think they're very smart. Well, how come he can do it? I can't. So how come these guys at Harvard didn't figure out? Why is this guy with a funny name down in San Diego? How did he figure it out? He's got to be full. That's the truth. And so I just kept writing papers. You know, it's a very strange thing to have a doctor like myself, non-academic, associated with my own center, writing 20 major original peer-reviewed publications on all this stuff. It doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, I thought for sure you were affiliated with some type of university, and you're not. You're pretty much solo, and you're doing this on your own.
on before, but since 2019, I funded the whole thing myself, which means I don't have a retirement account. And I'm lucky I don't have kids because I don't have to pay for a college education. This is kind of legacy.
Well, remember one thing that I mean, everybody who's ever been in ophthalmology, cataract surgeon in particular, Michael Kelman, father of phaco, people thought he was absolutely nuts, and you are kind of in the ilk and image of him, thinking of this breakthrough technology or process that helps people and their lives and their vision, and is certainly a viable alternative to what exists today. And I'm glad that you have the resolve and the focus and the maverick spirit to continue to believe in your, and the fact that you did this on yourself, I think is proof positive that you believe in what you're doing, and you're getting patents. So I mean, you're doing all the right things. So for corneal refractive surgeons listening who want to add to this capability, 3 questions: what's the learning curve? What staffing and workflow changes matter most? And finally, from a patient standpoint, how do you frame a cost versus reimbursement realities for advanced repair care while keeping it ethical and accessible?
To answer those, I'll go backwards. Cost, none of this is covered by insurances because there's been no corporate support. We are seeing some reimbursement from a couple of insurance companies for the last 3 years after the procedure is done for keratoconus. No one else is getting reimbursement. Okay. Most people are not. In fact, most insurance companies don't even cover cross-linking properly.
Is that
And
right?
so, yes, they don't really cover scleral lenses. They cover cornea transplant. And that's been the big problem is people have to come up with money to pay me, okay, to do this when they feel a disease like this should be covered under their insurance. The insurance maybe
I'm
will cover
surprised.
some of the scleral lens. So is, frankly, I think it's a shame. It's an absolute misguided shame that this is all they cover. That's because there's supposed to be nothing else. They don't recognize anything else. When we talk to them about this, they say it's experimental. Okay? When we talked to the head of the Keratoconus Foundation, she didn't want to talk to us because she didn't know us. She said, I pick the doctors I want to talk to. She wouldn't even read my papers. So when that kind of stuff happens, what do? You have no choice but to explain it to the patients, and they have to pay themselves. If someone wants to do this in the United States, the only laser available that can do this is the Alcon Wavelight, the EX500, the Contura system. If some Contura system, they can do this.
Right.
Okay?
I mean, they could do this. They could do this today.
They can do this today.
Wow.
And it is FDA approved. It is not true what the Alcon people say that corneal repair is off-label. It is not. I read the labeling. I showed the labeling. Sister Miss Lamonis and I showed the labeling to the executives at Alcon, where it says treatment of corneal warpage, their terminology, is a precaution under the FDA approval, which means you have to be trained. You can't just do it as your first case, but it is in the FDA approval for Wavelight Contura.
Specifically that instrument. So anybody who has one of those can essentially they start today.
You can do this.
Okay.
If someone wanted to do this, read my papers, you can email me. I'll tell you what to do. You want to come out? I'll show you. I don't mind. And I'll show you. And so my goal is I'm getting too old and too tired to go out and start training everyone on this. I'd rather sell it to a company and let them do the legwork. It's much easier for them. They have the resources. I'm just one guy out here. I'm not at Harvard. I'm not at Hopkins. I'm not at UCLA. I'm out in San Diego. I don't have an academic backing to do behind this, right? I mean, it's one of those, even the UCSD people, they don't send anyone to me.
Interesting.
Okay? Find me themselves.
And I'm sure they see a ton of complicated cases. That's kind of what they're known for, academics. All the private guys send all their complicated cases to them because they don't want to take the time.
Sit there and keep writing these papers. And there is so much data. If you read my stuff, you can do this. But if you want advice, my email is there. Reach out. That's all it is. This is not magic. This is pure science. And my work is on the back of others like Theo Seiler, who invented topography-guided ablation and who actually invented corneal cross-linking. Don Kanalopoulos, who mentored and taught me do his Athens protocol, which was the combination of topography-guided ablation and cross-linking. People thought he was absolutely crazy. They condemned him. The man persevered, and he's one of the great minds in our world today. So my work builds on the back of people like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Let's see what we can do. I've got it pretty standardized and pretty well down, and I think I've figured out pretty much everything about the ocular focusing system. But man, no one can ever know everything.
Sure, sure.
I want people to help. I want people to do this.
Well, Dr. Motwani, I just got to say, your work is a masterclass in refusing to accept good enough for patients with complex corneas. You've taken problems that often get routed toward tissue replacement and built a disciplined, teachable approach around repair, rehabilitation, and visual quality. And you've backed that up with published work and data that you can stand tall on in a clear, defined protocol that obviously works. And you have the results to prove it, not just once, but multiple. And so for our listeners, as you mentioned earlier, who want to learn more and really take on this procedure and learn more about it and maybe refer a challenging case or follow your educational content, where do they find you, like your website, your social channels, and any preferred professional contact routes that just to get in touch with you?
My email is actually published so the journals will publish an email to correspond with. And so you're welcome to reach out. There's not a doctor who's asked for help that I've ever turned away. Okay. To help a patient is more important than my patents, my knowledge, and not sharing it would be essentially hypocritical. Okay? And so I am happy to help anyone that ever calls.
Well,
To the
good.
best of my
Well, thanks a lot, Dr. Motwani. So the Q-Switch Conversations podcast is my way of giving back to an eye care industry and community that's shaped my career, my perspective, and my passion for what we do. This platform is truly built for you, the clinicians, the innovators, the change makers, redefining what's possible in our field. So if you got a fresh perspective, a unique experience, or know someone doing great things in eye care like Dr. Motwani, I'd love to feature them on the show. You can hit me up on my LinkedIn or drop me a line at d.spence@meridian.ch. That's a wrap for this Q-Switch Conversations podcast. Until next time, this is Spence, and I'm out.
You're listening to The Q-Switch with your host, Spence.